There's a point where you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start noticing, this is shaping me. Not in a dramatic way, not overnight, but slowly, quietly, in the way your reactions soften and your patience deepens. You don't feel the need to rush anymore. You're not trying to get ahead of life. You're letting life meet you where you are. You've learned that forcing clarity only creates noise, so you allow understanding to arrive on its own timing. And it does. You begin to notice how certain things no longer fit, not because they're bad, but because you've changed. Conversations that once drained you now feel unnecessary. Situations that once felt urgent now feel optional. You're choosing differently without needing to explain why. There's a quiet confidence forming, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that holds steady under pressure. You don't collapse when plans change. You don't cling when something leaves. You don't panic when answers take time. You trust your ability to adjust. You're also learning that peace isn't passive, it's active. It's a decision you make again and again to not betray yourself, just to keep things familiar. You're paying attention to how your body responds. Ease has become a signal. Tension has become information. And you listen. That listening is guiding you, not loudly, not forcefully, just clearly. You're not cutting people off. You're choosing where your energy goes. You're not closing your heart, you're protecting it. This phase isn't about isolation, it's about alignment. You're allowing space for what feels real and releasing what requires you to pretend. You don't need everything to make sense yet. You don't need the full picture. You just need to stay honest with what feels right and what doesn't anymore. And that honesty is quietly changing the direction of your life. As this awareness deepens, you start noticing how your inner world feels quieter. Not empty, just less crowded. You're no longer replaying every moment, no longer revisiting conversations to see what you should have said differently. You've learned that peace doesn't come from fixing the past. It comes from staying present. There's a subtle shift in how you relate to time. You're not racing it. You're not afraid of it either. You trust that what's meant to unfold will do so without force. You also begin to recognize how much strength it takes to remain soft in a world that rewards hardness. And you're choosing softness anyway, not as weakness, but as wisdom. You're allowing yourself to feel without overanalyzing, to rest without guilt, to move forward without needing applause. You don't rush decisions just to escape uncertainty. You let uncertainty teach you patience. And slowly, your confidence becomes less about certainty and more about adaptability. You know you'll figure things out, not because you have all the answers, but because you trust yourself to respond honestly when the moment comes. There's also a growing awareness around boundaries. Not walls, not ultimatums, just clarity. You know when to engage and when to step back, when to speak and when silence protects your energy better. This isn't withdrawal, it's discernment. You're beginning to see that alignment doesn't demand effort. It reveals itself through ease, through conversations that flow, through choices that don't leave you questioning yourself afterward. You're not chasing peace anymore. You're choosing it. And this choice is reshaping how you show up, in relationships, in work, in moments when no one is watching. This phase is teaching you something important, that growth doesn't always feel like becoming more.
Sometimes it feels like becoming clearer, and clarity is still unfolding.
Now you begin to notice something subtle but important. Your sense of urgency is fading, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped doubting yourself. You don't feel the need to rush outcomes anymore. You trust that moving too fast can distort what's meant to be clear. There's a patience growing in how you hold uncertainty. You don't label it as failure, you recognize it as space. Space to understand what actually matters. Space to notice what aligns and what only looked attractive out of habit. You're also becoming more selective with your energy. Not everything deserves your response. Not everyone deserves your access. And this selectiveness doesn't come from fear, it comes from respect for yourself. You're aware of how quickly old patterns try to re-enter when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're not fully present. So you pause, you breathe, you choose differently. That pause is powerful. It interrupts automatic reactions and replaces them with intention. You're learning that strength isn't always visible. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like walking away quietly. Sometimes it looks like staying grounded when everything around you is loud. You're also noticing how your definition of success is changing. It's no longer about speed or approval. It's about sustainability. You want a life that feels livable, a rhythm that doesn't exhaust you, progress that doesn't cost you your peace. This shift doesn't isolate you, it clarifies you. You still care, you still connect, but you no longer abandon yourself to do it. And as this clarity settles, you begin to sense that this phase isn't random. It's preparation. Not for chaos, but for something that requires steadiness. Something that will ask you to trust your inner compass more than outside noise. And that compass is still calibrating.
As this phase continues, you start to feel more at home within yourself. Not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer fighting where you are. You've stopped resisting the present moment. You're working with it. There's a new kind of honesty in how you move through life. You admit when something feels off. You admit when something feels right. And you don't talk yourself out of either. You've realized that ignoring your inner signals was more exhausting than facing the truth. So now, you listen earlier, before frustration builds, before resentment forms, before you lose yourself trying to keep things smooth. You're also noticing how calm doesn't mean passive. It means grounded. You can still take action. You can still make changes, but you're no longer acting from panic or pressure. Your decisions feel cleaner, less emotional residue afterward, less second-guessing. You're beginning to trust that clarity doesn't always arrive as a big realization. Sometimes it shows up as relief, as the absence of inner conflict. You also understand now that not everything needs to be shared. Some insights are meant to stay internal until they mature. You don't rush to explain your process. You let results speak when they're ready. That patience is new, and it feels unfamiliar, but also right. You're less attached to how things look from the outside. You care more about how they feel on the inside. That shift alone is changing how you experience progress. You're no longer measuring growth by how busy you are, or how much you're doing, or how much approval you receive. You're measuring it by alignment, by peace, by whether you still recognize yourself at the end of the day. And because of that, you're becoming more intentional about what you allow into your life, not out of fear, out of self-respect. This phase is still unfolding. There's more clarity ahead, more understanding waiting to surface. Nothing needs to be rushed. You're exactly where you need to be to receive what comes next. And this is where everything comes together. Not with a dramatic moment, not with certainty about the future, but with a quiet sense of trust. You trust yourself now, not because you have everything figured out, but because you know how to listen. You know when something aligns, you know when it doesn't, and you no longer argue with that knowing. You've learned that peace isn't the absence of challenges, it's the absence of self-betrayal. You don't force clarity, you allow it. You don't chase stability, you create it by staying honest with yourself. This season didn't rush you for a reason. You needed time to become someone who could move forward without losing themselves again. And now, you don't need permission. You don't need reassurance. You don't need everything to make sense. You move when it feels right. You pause when it doesn't. And you trust that both are part of the same path. What comes next won't demand you to be smaller, louder, faster, or different. It will meet you where you are, steady, aware, and grounded. You're not late. You didn't miss anything. This timing shaped you exactly as it needed to. And now you're ready to continue, not from pressure, but from alignment. That's how the next chapter begins.